Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face.
Okay.
All right, so we're live with Maureen Littlejohn from Swaziland, and we had a little bit of a technical issue there that I'm going to take full responsibility for. Maureen, we thought we were recording and we weren't. So the beauty of technology. Maureen, what time is it where you are right now?
It's 6:30 p.m.
6:30 p.m., 12:30 p.m. here. Thank you for joining us just after, I suppose, your dinner hour. So what's the temperature like in Swaziland?
Well, it's rainy, but it's around 23 degrees Celsius, I guess. So humid, okay. But yeah.
Okay.
Decent.
No snow recently?
No, haven't seen any in here.
It's been a little chilly here still in Toronto and just around the area, and looked like there was more snow this morning. Of course, spring started a couple days ago, but it's really hanging on. That's for sure. I'm done. I'm ready for it to be over. Maureen is a journalist. She's a communication specialist. She's working on gender issues right now. I'm going to let her tell you a little bit more about that, gender-based issues. And I want to. She recently had an article published in the Vancouver Sun, and the title of it is was commemorating International Women's Day just a little while back. It's Making International Women's Day Matter, a letter from Swaziland. So I think, Maureen, I've got a few questions I want to ask you about gender issues and gender-based violence and some of the things that you're currently dealing with. So does your title, Making International Women's Day Matter, doesn't it already matter, or is that kind of a rhetorical question, or could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, no, I think for some people, especially, when I was thinking about myself back in Canada, and you're a little bit out of touch about what women are going through around the world, you might not think it's that big a deal. You might think, as probably I did for a few years there at least, hey, I've got it pretty good. I went to university. I got a decent paying job. I had all sorts of opportunities. And I didn't really question it. I got over to Swaziland and wow, women they don't have the same kind of rights that we have in Canada. That feels sort of almost like 50 years behind where the sort of women's fight was 50 years ago is where it's at now here.
So what kind of issues would women in Swaziland be facing that, say, my wife isn't facing, or the students that I teach, these young women that I'm teaching? Can you talk about some of those significant differences?
Sure. Well, just even last year, women were not allowed to own property.
Wow.
For a long time, they've been treated as minors. So really, basically, that old-fashioned attitude where you're your husband's property. There's lots of issues around the work I'm doing now, which is gender-based violence. Mm-hmm. Of course, women do have human rights, but a lot of the rural women don't really understand what those are. So they just think it's part of normal life to be beaten up.
So it seems to me that it's about education to some degree. Well, it's a lot about education, but if you don't even know what your rights are within the context of a legal definition, is there a way of appealing to individuals? Some sort of religious ethic, or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? I mean, where do you even begin that conversation?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, there are many NGOs here, and they all sort of have their own take and are tackling the issue in their own way. Some might be looking at it from a health approach. Others are from a political approach. I mean, we do have to be careful politically here. They sort of say it's a democracy, but it's really the king has final say. So, and it isn't a multi-party system. So you can't really go at it in a political way like you could in Canada.
Right.
You have to go at it in a more sensitive way. Some of the things we're doing with SWAGAA, which is the Swaziland Action Group Against Abuse, which is where I'm working, is to take on small projects out in rural communities where you sensitize the community, you sensitize some of the chiefs, the male leaders, on why it would be good to have women as part of your team making decisions along with you, why it's not a threat, why. This is the other thing. I mean, the Constitution was only implemented, I think it was 2005. So a lot of people don't really know what's in there. And, I think a lot of people aren't reading.
Right.
So, there's a lot of stuff to tackle when you're looking at even just what we would consider such a basic as human rights.
So I've always believed that all of these issues, extreme poverty, water and sanitation, education, health issues, abuse, gender disparity, they're all interconnected in one way. Do you think, Stephen Lewis might agree with this as well, but do you think that gender issues, gender injustice, is kind of the root? Is it the root of all evil, gender disparity? I guess that's the question I'm really trying to ask. And how deeply connected is it to all these other issues?
Well, it's definitely connected. I don't think it's the root of all evil because there's many types of evil in the world.
Yeah.
But let's say gender disparity does bring around what I've been dealing with here, which is domestic violence, murder, rape, just emotional battles between the sexes. So I guess, I don't know, David. I mean, it's a big one to unpack. I think it definitely does impact everything that you mentioned, as far as certainly the things that we're trying to work at in development, but you have to understand how the culture is working, and you can't really just sort of go in and say it's going to be like North America with more of an equity. It's not. I mean, things are progressing, but it's you have to be careful about how you move forward.
Oh, I'm sure. It's interesting. You mentioned in your article in the Vancouver Sun that you're convinced that things are going to change. Tell me a bit more about that. Why are you convinced? It sounds like a fairly difficult environment you're working in.
Well, I guess two of the things that I've seen happen while I've been here. One is that the Children's Protection and Welfare Act went from a bill into an act, so it was made into law. We're still waiting for it to be actually implemented, but that's protection of children, which is really, I mean, it got the King's assent, which was the final stamp of approval, and that happened last fall, so that's exciting. Right now, we're working on the Sexual Offenses and Domestic Violence Bill. It's been kind of in the works for over 10 years. People have been pushing it, and there's been a lot of resistance. But it's now at the final stages. It's before the House of Senate. And I went with some of the SWAGAA representatives to the House of Senate, and they were talking about what kind of amendments some of the NGOs might want to see to it. So that, to me, that says they're going to be debating it pretty soon. And when that comes through, women will have a much better, the courts will have a smoother process for dealing with domestic violence and sexual offenses, which they don't now. They're working on laws that some of them are over 100 years old, and some of them they're just so out of date and the sentences are so small that they don't really deter perpetrators. So when I see the senators being positive and committed, that means there's hope, and there might even be, hope sooner than later as far as that being made into law.
So it's been a long time coming that those in higher level positions of power are even regarding these laws as the reasonable step forward. And I'm wondering, so there's change there. It's going to take time for that to trickle down. So is there a general disregard, would you say, obviously not in your cult, the ethos that you're working in, you're working with women who are trying to empower women. But what's your sense, culturally, from the people you're meeting? You're seeing a change higher level. You've got this buzz occurring around you, I would imagine, in the group that you're working with and some of the other NGOs. But what about others that you meet along the way? Is there hope? Is there reason for hope there?
Well, I think there is. It is a strongly patriarchal society. So in some ways, men feel threatened, by women's empowerment. But there are, at SWAGAA, we're working with a new project called Men Engage. And we all realize that there are lots of good men out there. They're just silent, actually, here in Swaziland on some of these issues. So we're trying to move forward on that, get the men to speak up a little bit more, get them to be the role models, be the champions, be the heroes.
It's interesting, Elizabeth Renzetti, the reason I know her name is because I read the article yesterday in the Globe, and she talks a great deal about bystander guilt and how we can ensure that our kids ultimately have the courage to act in situations that are troubling. And she tells the story of being on a bus when she was younger in her 20s in Germany, and a couple of young men started just this incredible, vile stream of sexual abuse towards a young woman on the bus, and she just sat there and did absolutely nothing, and nor did anyone else in the bus. And she just kind of, writes in the article that she says, "Oh, I kind of remember thinking, oh, somebody's going to deal with this, but it can't be me." So there was this realization that there was something deeply, unsettling and morally wrong about this situation. But she regrets not getting involved and so on, and then goes on to talk about, this whole idea of bystander guilt and how we stand back when we're in a large crowd. Do you think it has something to do with that? I mean, in your article, you talk about individual women making a difference. You talk about coming together collectively, and it's the little things and it's incremental steps. And I'm with you 100%, Maureen. But why the heck are these men staying silent? Why won't they step outside and say, "Hang on a second, guys, that's wrong, and here's why," and we gotta start making a change?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, here in Swaziland, there is the resistance. They often talk about tradition and culture. Tradition here is polygamy. Tradition here is paying bride price, and once you pay your bride price, you have ownership. I don't know. It's the men within more of the urban situation, perhaps they're the ones that are the more progressive thinkers. I think there is a bit of a disconnect with rural and urban. And the rural fellows, they're living a different reality than the urban. So, and there's the education factor. So, I don't know. I mean, I think some of the men in the rural situations are coming around. I know this one project we have, which is it's a women's participation in leadership project that we're working on with the EU COSPE NGO. And some of the male leaders, as long as you're respectful, you go in and ask them, can we come in and do this sensitization? We'll start with a women's coalition. We've gotten actually some positive response, and it's those slow incremental steps. But once the men start seeing that it's not a threat, that it's not like they're losing power, it's actually you're going to gain probably a better livelihood and a better home environment. So.
It's all, it's interesting. You're right in the middle of it, and because I've studied philosophy for so many years and worked in the international development sector, you see these issues that you just sort of think, I remember going to Cambodia for the first time, coming off the plane, and one of the first things I saw, my wife and I, Elizabeth, was this massive billboard with a white hands in handcuffs, and the caption was "Sex with children is a crime." And I just, sarcastically turned to Elizabeth and said, "Really? Is that right, eh? Like, I mean, you actually have to educate people about that." You know what I mean? Like, you actually have to, and so I've always been kind of really fascinated and interested in these ethical questions, and what are the foundations? So why did Rosa Parks do what she did? What was it that got her going, that stimulated her enough to actually stand up? And that wasn't an incremental step. That was, I guess Gladwell would call that a tipping point, I suppose. But anyway, it's a frustration of mine. It's a continued fascination of mine to work through these things with my students and the reading I do and so on. But any thoughts? I mean, for you, is the silver bullet education?
I think, yeah, definitely it is education. I think so. I went to this Men Engage workshop the other day, and we saw a video it was a documentary that had been made in Rwanda. And there was a lot of men in the room that were, they're already the converted.
Right.
But it was interesting to watch this video because it was about a man that probably had a very similar attitude to what's the norm here, which is like, didn't want the woman to be empowered, didn't want to see any changes around the home. But then slowly, as she did become empowered and got a little livelihood going with a little side business and became, just loved in the community because she was also taking in orphans, he started changing. Like you could see the change in him. And it was like, yeah, it wasn't exactly a Rosa Parks moment, but it was definitely, you could feel a love and a communication between them as a couple. Things like that you don't necessarily see all the time in relationships here because there is that power disparity. So I think, I always come back to the so what's in it for me thing. And,
yes.
And for a man like that, it's like, well, you're going to have a better livelihood. Your home is going to be a more harmonious and safe place for you and your wife and children. And you're probably going to have more abundance of food because you're working together on the agricultural plot. So, and maybe you'll have a little extra money to start up, with some chickens and some this and that. And then that is rise in society. So, it's not exactly Rosa Parks, but it's not like, glacial either.
Yeah, I think, this whole idea of social entrepreneurship, and we've seen it even here in Canada in the last week. I'm sure you've heard about the CETA reworking and how it's it's going to be rolled under foreign affairs and DFATE and so on, and big changes ahead, and of course lots of criticism already coming out. But what's interesting to me is that the Canadian government wants to align themselves more with the whole idea of public and private partnerships. So how can we push forward Canadian interests? And what you're talking about is you're appealing to the men on a self-interested level, and I agree that we have to do that, and that's kind of. But it's do you find it unsettling that we've got to appeal on based on an economic principle to behave well, to behave morally? Does that make any sense?
Oh, yeah, it is unsettling for sure. But it's like you're faced with a puzzle and you want to fit that puzzle together, and that's the one thing that actually does make it work. Becomes whole. Whereas if you're going on sort of the moral high ground, you get people being very defensive, you get people not engaged, and especially as working from an NGO's point of view. Let's say for me, coming from North America, nobody wants to hear from me, on the moral high ground. That's just offensive. And then for SWAGAA, working as women, there is a lot of resistance from men because it's like, well, we're against men. And it's like, no, we're not against men. We're for people. We're for positive, healthy relationships. But we get a lot of blowback from community about, well, you're the ones that makes our wives disobedient, and you're the ones that are ruining our children, talking about their human rights. And, now they won't obey us. So,
wow.
I have to be very careful with this, this looking at morals and what you believe is right.
Can you tell me, it's just my mind is going off in a lot of different directions here, but can you tell me some of the things you've had to do to be more effective in a cross-cultural setting? I would consider you somebody, as a journalist and as an international development worker, I would consider you very sensitive. But yet, what have you done differently? How have you grown to be more sensitive cross-culturally?
Well, rather than getting angry,
That's pretty funny.
I'm trying to listen and not speak before I get the full comprehension of what's going on. And I, as we've just discussed, I could get very angry about how I'm seeing men treat women. And I do get called by the media all the time to make comments. And I have to pedal backwards and say, wait a minute, I need to get the full picture here. And, in some cases, perhaps, the man has been threatened or whatever. So let's look at this as a bigger picture. And often it's something more about financial instability or weird pressure from other family members. There's so many things that I have to look at rather than just going in with that sort of those blinders on saying, well, a man is bigger, he's beating a woman. That's just so wrong. Right. It is wrong, but you have to look at the bigger picture.
So this whole idea of listening, I think that's great. How have you experienced any of this this gender disparity personally since you've been in Swaziland?
Well, actually, most of my interactions with Swazi men have been wonderful. So,
good.
It's very interesting. And I go into work and I say, you guys, I don't understand this. How can the men that we're dealing with, or our survivor clients, be dealing with these Swazi men? I don't see them. I don't. So, but once again, I am living in more of a urban situation. I am not living on a homestead, and I am not a target. So, it's personally, I think it's more just dealing with the stories, dealing with the survivors that come in, dealing with the little children that come in, trying to understand, dealing with the men that come in too that have been, they call it like there's financial abuse that goes on here because people, spouse dies, the rest of the family might come in and completely clear the house, and then the man is left there, and so there's all sorts of things. There's all sorts of things that I guess I have connected to.
Well, I think it's interesting. You talk about the stories. I mean, whether or not certain things actually happen, you still have to. And whether or not certain things are actually true, you can't really get hung up on the facts. You've got to be dealing with what's in front of you at the time. So the whole idea of listening, I think, sounds like, just so applicable in so many different situations. It seems to me that so many of expat development workers don't listen. We've got the solutions, we've got the answers, we've done the research, we've written the books, we have the PowerPoint, and so on. And I think that's deeply, deeply problematic. Hey, could you help me out with the difference between the notion of gender equality and gender justice? Gender justice seems to be an issue that we see tabled a lot more often. It's certainly a phrase that I hear more often. It's a phrase that I use more often. I'm not even sure I know what the actual distinction is. I wondered if you could unpack that for me.
Well, that's a good question because I need someone to explain it to me too. I think of there's the gender equality and then there's the gender equity, which is pretty clear. I mean, that's because the sexes cannot be equal in all ways because just physically we're not. Equity, of course, is putting us on an even playing field. Gender justice, I mean, I've been trying to pull that apart myself. I mean, is that just injustices that have occurred because of gender, and that could be male or female? David, I need some help with that one.
Well, I wonder. I mean, I think part of it is that are we incorporating everyone in this? Are we looking at transgender as well? So I think that's partially what gender justice is all about. But I think it's there's something there that's a little more, I think, comprehensive. I do like the phrase gender justice much more, and I think when it comes down to these issues, sometimes it really is about language. So, for instance, Jeffrey Sachs wrote The End of Poverty. Well, I think he should have written The End of Extreme Poverty. I think that would have been a more appropriate and frankly satisfying title for all of us. I think ending poverty is going to be very, very difficult, but I think ending extreme poverty is something we can aspire towards. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly something that we can pursue a little more as far as clarity goes in our own lives. But I think the idea of justice is, for me anyway, it's more comprehensive, it's more holistic, and it's also looking at everyone. It's not just necessarily, polarizing it and saying we've got men, we've got women, so we're being a little more, I guess for me, it's about being a little more inclusive.
For sure. And I guess it's also looking at injustice, right? I mean, it's like correcting injustices. So if we look at it from that point of view, and that's the same as, using the word human rather than, getting us all divided into a million different gender specialties, as it were, let's look at justice and creating a more equitable situation for all of us.
So don't worry about it at all. I can hear the dog barking in the background, but what's really fascinating is I think I can hear a very large cricket as well.
Yes, I'm outside. There's crickets. A toad hopping by, and there's the neighbor's dog going. So
let's just take a moment here to marvel at technology. For all my complaining and whining about the internet about how it never works, I think it's pretty incredible that we've had a 25-minute conversation pretty much uninterrupted so far, other than a few crickets, a toad, and a dog. It's pretty amazing.
It is.
So you've spent most of your time in the West. You've done a fair bit of traveling and a fair bit of work in this field, writing about other people and other issues. How far do you think we've come, with respect to closing the gender gap and maybe even, big questions, I know, but, how far do we have to go? I mean, sometimes I think we're miles ahead. And then every now and then you hear certain stories, or, you go to a dinner gathering or a party and you hear folks speaking about things in a particular way and you say, wow, didn't we give that up a long time ago?
Yes, I agree. And I've been thinking about a lot since I've been here because, as we were mentioning earlier, sometimes you can just sort of take your own rights for granted and you can take your own opportunities for granted. But, I look around here and I see things that were perhaps commonplace 50 years ago in Canada and the U.S., but then I also think, well, we also have a dearth of female politicians. We have, every time I would look at this, and this was even just before I left, which was around 8 months ago, looking in the newspaper and looking at, those pictures of CEOs, who's gotten a promotion or a new announcement. 9.9% of the time it's males. Mm-hmm. So I'm just really thinking, yes, we have definitely made all sorts of progress because the young women now just don't have, they don't have to fight like we did in the 70s and 60s, but there's still definitely a long way to go.
I was reading an article, I think last week, about an organization, and I don't know if it's in Toronto or if it was based in New York. I'm sure there's more than one, but essentially it's an organization on behalf of men getting together and saying, hang on a second here. We think the pendulum's swung a little bit too far on behalf of women. And I don't know about you, but I don't think I agree with that notion. Would you say that's a fair assessment or not so much?
No, I wouldn't. And I think the other thing I was thinking is, if we want to see more women in politics, if we want to see more women in top executive positions, there has to be more, equitable sharing of the chores at home, the child rearing and the chores at home, because that's what actually holds a lot of women back still, my friends, many included. So, the other interesting thing is, and I've been meeting more and more men who are interested in being stay-at-home dads or being the guy that makes dinner. My brother is a fantastic chef, and he makes all the meals for my sister-in-law and their 3 kids. So, I'm seeing that it's really positive, and I think it just I don't know, it just makes me feel really hopeful.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think there is reason to be hopeful. I mean, I look at some of the conversations that I have with my kids about some of these issues, gender issues as well, but development issues, ethical issues, and I think this is where I think our hope truly lies. I mean, obviously, you don't want to absolve yourself of personal responsibility and what I would call moral obligation of one kind or another and just say, oh, well, the kids are going to sort it out. But at the same time, I think that if we're raising our children and teaching them to behave in particular ways and to align themselves with others, I guess that's the phrase, align themselves with others, I think there's a lot of reasons. There are a lot of reasons to be hopeful.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree.
What's changed about your attitude, would you say, towards gender issues since you've been there? You've been there, what, about 6 months now?
8.
8 months. So have you seen any major shifts, or do you think that you'll have to get back home and kind of feel that, that contrast again to really get a sense for where you've grown?
I definitely would like to get home and see how I feel with the difference. I mean, I'm sort of hammered over the head with it here with the stuff in the paper every day. It's horrendous. Like there was a story last week about a man beating up his wife for wearing trousers. Oh. And we comment on that one, like stuff like that. And you're just like, oh, God. But so I know I won't be faced with that when I go home. But I do know that there's all sorts of stuff that goes on that isn't reported. And then there's all sorts of stuff that, people, I don't know, we have a much better system in place at home for women who are survivors, halfway houses or shelters, that kind of thing. Not halfway houses, but shelters, where they can be safe. They don't have that here. So we do have a really strong system. But you want to see the fact that these women have to go into these places negated altogether. So I don't know. I know I'll feel probably the fight will go on, but it won't be quite as extreme as it is here.
Do you think that it might have something to do with choice? So you mentioned the story about the woman in her trousers. I mean, it's tragic. It's horrifying to think that actually happens. I know it still happens here in the West for what I would call a ridiculous issue, beating up somebody else. I don't know that there are any reasons for doing that, actually. Really? I mean, it happens all the time, I suppose, and bar brawls are occurring nightly around the world. But does this woman have a choice, do you think, in this particular context? I mean, you don't know the details, I'm sure, but generalizing, you don't have the hostels and the places for women to go. So is she trapped? I mean, here in Toronto, here in the West, there are, I would argue, quite a few options. You can call the police, and for the most part, you're going to get a response. You could go to a hospital. There's different avenues for women to take here. How does choice or lack thereof play into some of these stories?
What women usually do is they go back to their parental homestead, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. It depends. If a parent has remarried because one of the parents has died, often the new wife will be hostile to the child coming home. The woman. It really depends. There are hospitals. The police do have a domestic violence unit. What happens is that there really isn't, once you've done the reporting, and it can be very humiliating for women here, and some of them just won't even do it because the police will laugh at them. And these are about very serious things like rape. Mm-hmm. So they end up just, maybe telling a neighbor or maybe telling somebody in their community. But, I mean, it depends, once again, on the region that you're in. But the women here don't have a lot of choices. And the other thing is a lot of the women don't support each other. And I think what a lot of this boils down to is just there's not enough resources to go around for many people. So they don't want, like aunties really don't want to see let's say an abused child come and live with them because there isn't enough food to go around. So they put that child out. And it's very different from how it would be in Canada. If let's say you had a couple and one of them died, and then the one remarried, and the new wife doesn't want to have anything to do with the children from the former wife, and so she puts them all out, and they're all on their own, 15, whatever, 16, and they don't have any support, and then they start getting abused by other people even within the family. So
well, and all of a sudden we're back to kind of our original comment about how everything really is connected. And so the causal links between, gender issues and poverty and so on, I mean, I think are deeply held. Stephen Lewis in Race Against Time talks about it. I mean, he talks about it every time he speaks, I think. But the whole idea of gender issues and gender injustice, it seems to me, are kind of central. So can I ask you about, you talk about resources and I think I hear you talking about capacity building and so on. Are the NGOs there that are, I know UNICEF's there, I know the bigger NGOs are there, there's lots of smaller organizations like the one that you're with. Are they making a difference? Are they necessary to be doing the work that they're doing? It sounds to me like they are.
They're doing, yes, some of them are doing great work, some of them are heavy on the bureaucracy. So you get a little bit of everything here. You get little tiny NGOs run by a couple that are trying to, teach young girls about hygiene out in the rural sticks. So you get other little tiny ones that are helping pay school fees. So yes, things are helping. As I say, it is small, incremental steps that you see mostly. But yes, they are making a difference. You do see, and SWAGAA, we've been around for 20 years, and we're the only homegrown NGO that is doing the kind of counseling and help for survivors that's here in the country.
So 8 months in a pretty negative, difficult atmosphere. I think I can hear in the tone of your voice, it hasn't knocked you down, or at least it hasn't knocked you down significantly enough that you're getting out or you're backing out. I mean, if you believe that NGOs are still making a difference there, it seems to me you probably believe that you still are and have and are going to. You still believe in this notion of change and the little things.
Oh, I absolutely do. And even just from that very small perspective of getting the SWAGAA voice out to the media. I've heard from many clients that the reason that they even know what we do is because of the work I've done, which is getting out there on radio and television and newspapers and letting people know where we are. We have a toll-free line, this kind of thing. So I feel like, yeah, even the time that I've been here, it might not be giant changes, but the small part I've played, it has probably helped quite a few people. So I do feel good about that.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty important. I think it's more. I think you can even feel better than good about it. It seems to me. I mean, the more I and I'm just to encourage and affirm the work that you're doing. I think it's incredible, and I really truly believe it's about incremental change. It's about baby steps. It's about doing the things that we can do, and not looking at an issue and say, someone else, like Elizabeth talked about in her article in the Globe. Oh, gee, I know someone will take care of it. It just can't be me.
No, incremental steps.
So thank you for taking the time to chat. I really do appreciate it. Do you want to tell us the website of the organization you're working for?
Oh, it's the www.SWAGAA.org. O-R-G.
Thank you for your time today. And you're going to be home when, Maureen?
I will be home. My mandate runs until July, so I will be home in the summer.
Well, we'll look forward to chatting to you when you're back, and maybe we can get you back on as a guest as well.
I would love to, David. That would be great.
So I just want to end with a quote from Maureen's article in the Vancouver Sun. Quote, "This International Women's Day," and that's past, by the way, folks. "This International Women's Day, I urge Canadian women to reconsider the impact they can make in the push toward gender equality here and abroad. Volunteer, donate resources, lobby politicians, and stay connected with the issues. The advancement of equal rights for women is possible. It just requires taking the first step."